Hi everyone, this is Mrs. McCreary. Today we are going to talk about fractions. Now both Pure Mathematics and the Elementary Treatise talk about fractions in a different way. Our Elementary Treatise talks about them more as kind of just what you do at the end of division when you have a division problem that doesn't end with a 0. So here we have 7 divided by 3, 2, 6, and now we have this 1 left over. So it's definitely more of the idea that now we just kind of stick that on the end, and we'll talk more about those views later in the week. But for today, we're going to focus mostly on the way that Pure Mathematics talks about fractions, which is over here. Now, both of these can be written as vulgar fractions, which is to say, as opposed to writing them in decimal form. That's just the term they use. More up-to-date terminology is just to say fraction or to say a common fraction. But vulgar fraction is just what you normally think of as fractions, where you have the number and then a line and then another number underneath. So these are both our nice vulgar fractions or common fractions, and in this one over here with the 7 divided by 3 can also be written as 7 over 3, and we'll keep that around for just a second. Now these are both simple fractions, as we have nice whole numbers, nice integers everywhere involved. We'll talk about what happens or what we do with numbers that aren't integers later. But over here in the 5/12ths, we're going to talk about what exactly that means. This fraction goes with this nice rectangle here, and you can see it's broken up into 12 pieces. And that means the 12 is our denominator. Our 3 is our denominator here. The denominator tells you how many pieces you have, how many groups you have, how many sets in each group. That's going to be the way of dividing things. Now on top we have our numerators, and that tells us how many pieces of the pie we're concerned with, how many boxes get colored in, how many we had to start with, that type of information. The numerator tells us how many you actually have, and the denominator tells us how everything is being divided up, or how many groups you have to be working with, as in this 12. There are 12 different sections. We're only worried about 5. Okay, so now let's talk about proper versus improper fractions. We're just going to, again, I'll do 5 over 12 versus 7 over 3. Now this 5 over 12 is a proper fraction because the numerator is smaller than the denominator. That's something that you can work with very easily. You can draw it very nicely, as I had on the other page, and everything fits very well. When we have this 7/3 here, things kind of get a little bit messy, because 7, as you can see, is bigger than 3. So that is what we call an improper fraction. Improper fractions happen generally, though they also can be written as mixed numbers, where you have a whole number, an integer, with an additional fraction to accompany it. So we can see that from the division problem I did earlier, 7/3 is the same as 2 1/3. Alright, so now we're going to talk about something called a compound fraction and complex fractions. And they're kind of the same idea. They're just written a little bit more complexly. And this is something that you might come in contact with when you're solving an algebraic equation that has a lot of fractions in it. But it's not something that happens too terribly often in practical mathematics, which you would do, to like balance your checkbook or something. That this isn't going to come up. Anyway, so in a compound fraction, you have basically a fraction in the numerator, or you have a mixed number in the numerator. So it would be like 2 1/3 So what that means is you have your shape that is divided. So you want 2 of them, but then you also want about 1/3 more. Does that look like 1/3? It's close. Okay, so it gets a little bit even more segmented than a regular fraction, a vulgar fraction, because we're talking about now parts of parts, which then leads us into complex fractions. So a complex fraction would be when you would have a fraction of another fraction. And you're going to hear that terminology very often when we start talking about multiplying and dividing fractions. So if you had something, say, 1/3 of 5/8. So now this second fraction becomes like its own denominator. So what that would end up looking like would be 1/3, and then you've got a really long line to make sure that your fraction bars don't get confused, over 5/8. Okay? And so we will talk about how to deal with something like that a little bit later, but for now, it's just kind of getting used to the idea of what everything is. So, just very quickly, again, we have a vulgar fraction would be anything that is what we think of as a normal fraction, proper or improper, complex or compound. Okay, and then again we have some nice proper fractions where the numerator, that top number, the number that we actually have, the number that we're dealing with, the number that we have left, is smaller than our denominator, which is the number we're dividing by, or the number of groups that we have, or the number that's in each group. Okay, so proper fraction, the numerator is smaller than the denominator. Oh, and this one too. Now, in an improper fraction, our numerator is going to be bigger. And in an improper fraction, you can always then turn that into a mixed number, which in this case would be 2, I believe, in 4/8. We'll talk about reducing fractions on another day. And then we have here a nice compound fraction. We have a fraction in the numerator above an integer in the denominator. So that's just a quick explanation, a quick definition of all the different types of fractions that your book really goes into, and we will talk more about these later as we begin to work with them. Again, please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, or always, write them down, and we can talk about them on Thursday. And I hope you have a great day.